Welcome, everyone. Welcome to VR is about to change everything, developing a VR innovation strategy. I'm David Mullet. I'm the founder of Virtualize here in New York City. Please don't hesitate to ask questions throughout so we can try to make this session as conversational as possible. We'll be speaking in some pretty broad strokes about VR. I'm hoping that we can get you thinking in a certain way about VR. Rather than providing any real specific answers, I just hope that we can plant some seeds and really give you a sense of the language that we're talking about with the technology and the medium. And as always, I think the more that you can get into VR and virtual reality, the better off you and your company will be. So we'll cover a few things here. What is VR? How are people using it? We'll talk about how VR can be a new tool within your organization to really transform your business model, really transform your customer journey, really transform your internal operations or marketing. And we can think about different ways that VR can be incorporated and when. And then I'll cover some different approaches to VR strategy and implementation later on in the presentation if we have time to get there. But I will really start from the beginning with this stuff because there is a lot to talk about. So first things first, what is VR? Well, virtual reality is the new suite of digital technology that generates a three-dimensional spatial simulation. This allows users with their immersive headsets to feel as though they're actually in another environment, and the things in that environment are happening to them. And personally, I believe that we're on the doorstep of one of the most exciting eras in the history of technology and the human experience. The language that we define together through pioneering this new VR medium is going to catapult our culture into a powerful new era. So my job is to really give you a really strong sense and a feeling about how valuable this tech can be, and to understand it and to motivate you to get involved with it. So let's start with the hardware. We have your basic PC-based virtual reality systems, the Oculus Rift and PlayStation VR. These are real-time render virtual reality systems that allow you to look around inside of a space and poke your head around corners as we do in reality. We've got the Vive, standing, room-scale, PC-based virtual reality system. You can walk around in a space in a room about 3 meters by 3 meters, standing up. Mobile VR is smartphone-based VR technology where you snap your Android phone into a headset. Augmented reality is related to virtual reality. It provides a spatial digital overlay on top of the real world. This slide here on the screen has the HoloLens on the left and a diagram of Magic Leap on the right. We will be focusing pretty much exclusively on VR here, but AR is definitely part of that larger family of this next generation of technology that will likely merge with virtual reality in the next 5 to 10 years. other things to bear in mind with the VR ecosystem. So inside of the headsets, we have virtual reality digital storefronts and content channels. Oculus has theirs, Netflix, Steam, Samsung. We're going to have a world of virtual reality web browsers inside of the VR headsets. I think it's safe to say that most brands and companies will need a VR storefront, just like they have their existing website and a mobile app. How do we move around in VR space? Well, we use input devices. Each kind of headset has its own input device and controller. You can select things by gazing at them. It's called gaze selection. Or through anatomical control systems like leap motion that use hand gestures as input, analogous to a mouse, but require no hand contact or actual touch. We've got VR user interfaces. It's a new realm of interactivity. Spatial user interfaces. No longer are things flat. We're leaving the flat world of the screen, and we're emerging into a three-dimensional spatial universe where what was before on an X, Y plane is now suddenly on a Z plane. So you have menus that float in space or extend out from your hands, like this one here in Google's tilt brush in the Vive. To navigate, you teleport from place to place. All this stuff is new and in being developed day by day, week by week, as we move forward into building this new digital virtual universe out. So just a few things about getting started. What do I recommend to do for you to get started? Well, the number one thing is getting a headset, and literally it's hard to overemphasize this because we can talk about VR all day, but spend as much time in the headset as possible. I think that it's impossible for you to make any real headway with VR without logging the hours. Read the books. Oculus, Vive, these companies, Magic Leap, they use these books as roadmaps for creating their feature sets, creating their 10 plus year futures. Ready Player One is being made into a film by Steven Spielberg. Ernest Klein is the chief creative officer at Magic Leap. There's a lot to learn there. And it's also hard to underestimate the importance of connecting with the community of people that are creating VR. Follow the VR influencers on social media. Go to your local meetups, meetup.com. There's going to be local VR meetups that will allow you to connect with your local community. I think that we all need to remember that our value in terms of being able to build VR apps and content is dependent on our access to talent, and that's where you're going to find the talent. Go to the conferences. Many of them are in California now. Become part of communities like Upload and listen to interviews. There's hundreds and hundreds of interviews with all the different VR makers and talent and experts on voices of VR. Watch all the clips online. So it may take a little while to ramp up to get a real knowledge base about this stuff, but the material is out there, and I've got to say it's a lot of fun to absorb it, and there are a lot of different challenges, and it's a tremendous tremendously exciting space to connect with. So I hope you guys get the same bug that I have, that I got a few years ago when I got into VR. Follow up with us. Bring in third-party VR experts to provide auxiliary VR services, strategy, a VR roadmap. My company, Virtualize, provides support to businesses and organizations who are looking to integrate this tech into their services and operations. This way you don't have to hire an internal team before you kick things off with your VR efforts. So those are the basics there. Now let's get into some big picture implications about VR and how it's being used in the market. So VR is a new and tremendously useful tool. Virtual reality is this next generation of technology across all components of the digital pipeline, including PCs, mobile, GPUs, input devices, spatial audio, real-time rendering, AI, cloud computing, optics, image acquisition devices, you name it. It's hard to actually touch on everything, but it's that and all the software that brings it to life for the users. I view VR as the new catch-all convergence point for all these different breakthroughs happening in one place. So as a way to frame it, I would say that VR is the next major computation platform. We can look at the 80s as the beginning of the PC revolution. The 90s were the internet revolution. The noughts were the mobile revolution. And the teens are now the virtual reality revolution. What does this mean? Well, we're moving into a world beyond screens. The future is a post-screen digital world. It may be hard to imagine, but it's true. Virtual reality creates sensory-rich, high-bandwidth digital experiences that are perceived by your brain as actually being real, and the events as if they're actually happening to you. This spatial post-screen world is what we call the metaverse, or the virtual world web. And VR isn't really just about 360 visual or spatial audio. VR will eventually drive the perception of all of our sense channels: smell, taste, touch, haptics, vestibular. It's actually intended to be pervasive on all the senses, and that's what really creates a sense of presence. And Facebook, which owns Oculus, has an R&D lab in Seattle working on it right now. And I like to help people understand what VR is going to be and the implications using an analogy that Oculus chief scientist Michael Abrash brought up in the last Oculus Connect conference. He said that the history of media consumption, be it reading, visual arts, television, film, it's like we've been sipping information through a tiny straw. Whereas the future of consuming media via virtual reality, it's as if we're standing under a waterfall with a complete sensory immersion, flooded with information and stimulation. So in that sense, virtual reality is really a revolution of the human sensory experience. So what are the commercial implications of VR? I think VR is a game changer disruptively across all industries. This generation of VR obviously stems from the gaming industry. Oculus founder Palmer Luckey was a gamer, so this will be an easy win commercially. PlayStation VR is going to have the largest user base right out of the gate, far and away, in the tens of millions beyond the Rift and the Vive. As you may know, the Rift and the Vive are available now. The PlayStation VR unit will be available in the coming months. VR could be possibly one of the most radical tools to transform medicine. Even existing uses right now give us a tiny glimpse of the vast possibilities. Remote surgeries, tools that help paraplegics regain bodily functions, treating PTSD patients with exposure therapy, pain management by flying burn victims through ice fields in virtual reality, fixing lazy eye, training is in VR is impossible to underestimate the significance of training in VR, and that may be something that you want to consider within your own organization as well. But as a spatial medium, VR obviously lends itself well to anything like architecture, engineering, design. Anything that's innately spatial is ripe to be ported into the VR universe. The power of working and collaborating inside of fully digital environments is so vast. It's so vast that it's hard to underestimate VR's impact on the production pipelines and business models of these industries. I think that learning is exponentially more impactful when you can be teleported to a place to see things firsthand rather than something on the printed screen. Or a blackboard or a whiteboard across the room. As they say, the richest form of information is experiencing something directly. And if we take a quick look at what may be the virtual World Web, being able to walk inside of a Wikipedia page is a good example of that. I was in San Francisco at a Mozilla Firefox virtual reality conference a couple of years ago and was able to walk inside of a Wikipedia page about pine trees and was able to see the tree in full scale and then also zoom into a quantum atomic scale to see how the molecular structure of the tree worked. And honestly, I've never seen anything like it. Imagine being able to see planets at scale and so on and so forth. It's tremendously powerful stuff there for education. When we think about work-wise internally within our organizations, I think that productivity is going to be completely transformed. Imagine all of your existing applications on your desktop being ported into spatial VR. Word processing, spreadsheets, stock tickers floating in 3D space all around you. With headsets, more screen space makes workers more productive, and there's more time spent in tasks because there is less navigation between windows. Working in a VR environment that has depth, Z-space, parallax, that's how we understand the world around us. So it leads to more productivity because tasks can be spatially organized. And people are happier working in spaces that they can customize, which creates a happier workforce. I think the communication is something to consider for VR. Facebook's obviously pioneering social VR, including all the realms of their business model, sharing, messaging, broadcasting, advertising, etc. We're all going to have digital doppelgangers, avatars in VR space that allow us to feel as if we're really in spaces, communicating with other people really in spaces. Telecommuting is going to be changed. It's going to be vastly superior with VR meeting rooms. There's going to be less business travel, more effective remote interviews, tours, etc. Obviously, entertainment is going to be upended. None of the traditional rules of filmmaking apply to creating virtual reality experiences. So, it took decades to develop the new language of cinematography, and VR storytellers now are just starting to go through the process of figuring out what works and what doesn't, and how this new medium is going to unfold. Hollywood is starting to roll out VR experiences and invest heavily. News is going to be radically transformed. Imagine being at a story, experiencing it with your entire body rather than just from the outside perceiving it on television, but being there as if you're actually at the scene of an event. So those are just a couple examples of different industries and different ways that things are going to be affected. But when is it all going to happen? Well, it's happening now. We have the opportunity now to create impactful VR experiences and develop VR apps that will give us crucial advantages in a competitive marketplace. I think now is the time to look to VR as an opportunity to reinvent your business model or even aspects of your business model. We can think about VR as a way to increase margins and to generate revenues at a potentially vast new scale. I like to call this the car phone stage of VR. It's still early days. It's the equivalent of the early days of any technology or industry. These headsets now will slowly melt away, and there may be other paradigm shifts in the way the tech works, like retinal projection or other breakthroughs that shift it and improve it. But right now, we're still in the very early days. I also like to use the idea of the Walkman effect as a way to help people frame how this tech might roll out into a wide stream, a mainstream public, a wider audience, and become socially normalized. If in the 70s you asked people if it were imaginable that it would be normal to be walking down the street with a pair of headphones on, people would say that you were crazy. Well, I think it's the same with headsets now. They seem absurd, but people are really taking to them pretty well, and I think it will become normal within the next couple of years. So we've all seen the market data for VR. We're all wondering, well, how long is it going to take? I think that none of us really know, but I think that some of the numbers are helpful when we're trying to frame this in terms of our own approaches. Goldman Sachs predicts a $182 billion VR market by 2025, that's larger than TV, and that's TV sales and content and advertising. So that's tens of billions more than TV within 10 years. So it's going to be big. Where is it now? Well, with all the headsets included, there will be approximately 7 million headsets in the hands of consumers by the end of this year, although it's worth noting that half of those are in China. Currently, less than 1% of PCs worldwide are powerful enough to run the Oculus or the Vive. So for all the excitement that we have, we still need some breakthroughs in terms of the horsepower of these computers to drive the very demanding rendering needs of the headsets. Market forecasts are predicting that VR platforms will be shipping in the tens of millions annual range within 3 to 5 years. The user base of gamers is is in the hundreds of millions. So there's a chance that this stuff could even take off faster than PCs did, when they were released in the next 5 years. But what I like to do is look at the mobile app ecosystem as a precedent. Once smartphones were in the hands of consumers, it took years of design iterations and a critical mass of content to create our current mobile platform. If we see that as an analog, it's going to take 5 or more years to really have a widespread VR platform and interface, as well as the design standards that allow accessibility for the average consumer and the lowest common denominator. But solutions-based virtual reality is available now, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. If you can build a VR application and define specifically who's engaging with it and when, and you're able to give those people the headsets, perhaps internally within your company, then you will be able to take advantage of the technology now. So I'm going to breeze through a few current examples of commercial applications in VR. IKEA's got their room scale VR in the Vive. It's simple. You can change surfaces and colors and design features. We did shoot for the new little beach house Malibu for the Soho House group. I think that shooting hotel groups and teleporting people from remote locations to properties worldwide is a very clear application of VR. Experiential VR is more activation-based. It's more sophisticated physical VR installations that may happen at particular venues. And these things you potentially frequently use other elements, 4D elements. It's called elements like layers of touch feedback, haptics, rumbling, wind and water sprays, other sensory devices that add more realism to really create that deep sense of presence. And these things are tremendously powerful. The more sensory channels that you can layer onto an experience, the more impact it's going to have neurologically, the more resonant it's going to be, the more of a memory you're going to create for that user. In fact, the way that these things work is when you look back on having been in a VR experience, your brain actually thinks that you were there. So sometimes it becomes hard to discern whether something actually happened or it happened in VR. And I think that's something that we're going to be seeing more and more of in the future. New York Times virtual reality is an incredibly well-curated original app for the Google Cardboard. I think it's worth bearing in mind that the New York Times actually just bought an ad agency, virtual reality ad agency here in New York, a content studio that will allow them to expand their VR production. So I think that we can look to the bigger media players and the kind of dinosaurs of the world to be purchasing VR shops to give them VR capabilities moving forward. I think that 360 is a tremendously important thing for us to bear in mind right now, because this is really the wheels on the ground of the commercial rollout of VR. It's the way that a lot of people are seeing 360 content. It's the difference between VR and 360 is VR, you're wearing a headset and you're viewing 360 content inside of a headset, so it feels real to you. With 360 content, you're using the gyroscope and accelerometer on your phone or your tablet and able to swing it around to kind of effectively see around inside of the video sphere or photosphere content. But Facebook launched 360 maybe 6 months ago. YouTube launched 360 even earlier. And I think this format allows consumers to begin to become comfortable with 360 video and view this content on their screens while the rest of the hardware world catches up. But this is where you can see more eyes on the content, which can help you justify your spending. You can also make content that works in virtual reality that you can roll out onto 360 as well. And 360 content tends to get more views than traditional 2D content. So it's a good thing to become familiar with. So VR solves a lot of huge problems that marketers have around engagement and awareness for a number of reasons. Users wearing the headset are completely immersed, so they're less distracted and they have more attention on the story and the message inside of the headset. The intensity of the VR experience is greater than traditional media by a long shot, which, like I mentioned, says it creates impactful emotions, and that, is linked to real behavior change. And it's super memorable. Our brains are built to remember events linked to locations, and VR is an innately environment-based format, meaning that VR experiences have a longer trace in the audience's memory. And I think that, early adopters can definitely benefit from the newness of the whole thing. I think it's not really about the technology, but it's about the technology's ability to connect with people and allow them to experience something memorable. Potential pitfalls would be we don't create safe and comfortable VR. If it's not done properly, it may cause fatigue and illness. It's important to test VR heavily. We don't know really what works and what doesn't yet. So every project that you make really has to be tested to be sure that it's 100%. So what area of your business will be most affected? I think it's important for us all to think like internally facing kind of entrepreneurs within our own companies. Your ability to innovate within your own company or for your company is really the only competitive advantage that any of us have. There's certain questions you're going to want to ask yourself. What area is VR going to have most impact in? Is it going to be marketing? Is it going to be sales? Is it going to be operations? Is it going to be customer service, travel? Or is it going to be on your product itself? It could have a massive impact in any of those areas, and potentially a number of them. I would ask yourself, well, where do I currently use video? Where do we currently use screens, cameras, and our current business model and customer journey? Perhaps VR would be a game changer at one of those points in your business. VR is a part of what I like to call the computer vision revolution. All the technology from film and gaming are suddenly relevant as solutions across the board in the whole digital landscape. So I would really point to those places of video and cameras and see what you can uncover there. I would ask yourself, well, what kind of 2D or legacy content do we have that we can actually port into VR? What kind of existing assets do we have that we can bring into VR. Netflix has a VR app where they built a little theater in Unity, and they have all their Netflix content available in that theater in VR. So that's an example of an easy way to port 2D legacy content into VR. How can you use VR to expand your brand? Are you targeting a broad market or a small market of influencers? Ask yourself, well, what's the ROI on your investment in VR? That's one of the questions that we get all the time, and which is why I wanted to point to 360 video, because that's one of the key ways to get the content on a lot of eyes. Ask yourself, how many eyes are going to see it? Is this going to be a one-off event, an installation, experiential, or is this going to be something that we try to cover a broad audience for? And the broad marketplace doesn't really have access to VR yet, so there's going to be different ways to get those things out there, but it's not going to have the same coverage yet as TV or the internet. Like I mentioned earlier, how can you use VR for training systems and safety within your organizations? I think there's an obvious benefit to being a part of a leading edge technology like VR, because it automatically positions you as fresh and forward thinking. You can ask yourself, well, where do I want to be in this adoption cycle? This chart here, I would say for virtual reality, extends through 2020 and beyond. Is it more intelligent for your company to jump in now for an early mover advantage, or wait until the dust settles and the path forward becomes a bit more clear and safer with some existing precedents? Which departments are going to be allocating budgets to your VR solutions? How are you going to be scaling up your VR efforts moving forward? Are you going to attempt to build strategy and teams in-house, or bring in third-party consulting vendors like Virtualize to structure an initial approach and roadmap and source talent? Feel free to jump in with questions, guys, because I have a bit more to cover here, but I'm happy to respond to anything that you guys are thinking. I think it's very important for us all to think about the kind of talent that we need. We need Unity developers, Unreal Engine developers, UX, UI designers. I'm just going through this stuff to give you a sense of the language that we're using around shaping this medium to start to get things rolling for you and plant some seeds in your mind. We're sourcing 3D communications and presence experts, compositors, virtual reality producers. I think that user study talent is very important for us to be able to test what works and what doesn't. Interaction and input talent. I don't want to make this seem too complicated, but this is just to give you a sense of the people that are starting to contribute to creating the new VR ecosystem. We're talking about render pipeline engineers. The list goes on. It's just good to familiarize yourself with these new categories here. So internally, I think it's worth bearing in mind that a culture of VR innovation is what's going to really help you make some headway into the VR space. Poor leaders think that their job is coming up with a big idea and mobilizing people to execute that idea. But VR innovation it's a team sport. Innovative ecosystems are defined by collaboration between a diverse range of talent, and there may be some abrasion there, but as long as we can create a place where there's an interplay of ideas around VR, and including the diverse fringes of expertise that may become involved, you'll be creating a place where you can make those discoveries in terms of how you can implement it. Someone's asked here what the best use for VR for banks would be. Well, I would think about how can you port your existing software into VR? How can you make your bankers more effective by being able to visualize the data that they're working with? Data visualization is tremendously powerful in VR when you can be inside of the spreadsheet rather than viewing it on a screen. Think about how do your bankers use screens, and what kind of apps do they use internally, and how can you port those apps into virtual reality. But I think that the VR innovation is something that really requires a large investment of time, energy, and other resources. So it's good to really know that up front. You have to have the patience to learn and potentially change course along the way, which is why I think that it's important to potentially build your VR strategy and your portfolio of VR ideas in an innovation sandbox where you're creating micro projects that may eventually feed into your core technology offerings, but have a place to be developed, to be prototyped, and to be tested before any kind of longer-term, bigger picture investment or integration into the main tech offerings of your company. So, looking at the micro project approach, you need to have that willingness to test these new ideas and create experiments that pursue these things quickly without too much risk. So to do that, implement VR in small and inconspicuous ways to test the success and feasibility, and then generate some data that you can analyze to say, okay, well, we've tried this app, we've tried this on XYZ users, this audience, we've gotten this feedback, they love this feature, they don't love this feature, this component of the design is working, this isn't, and then from that you can grow. I think that you need a system to manage your VR micro projects. Prioritize things, monitor them, scale them, terminate them if they're not delivering the results that you're looking for. I think it's worth considering having an internal VR kind of committee that can create these tracks of development for you. And it's important to have an attitude of transparency and openness to create this ecosystem of innovation. And it looks like we're getting close to the end here, but I will click through here to show you how you can collapse a lot of development into a week. Take a week to do a VR sprint, crunch it into 1 week, and you can learn quickly. How do you integrate VR? How might you fail with VR? And then sketch out the ideas, make a decision on what you're going to prototype, build the prototype, and test it on users. So, takeaways, think about design, bring micro projects into your work, sprints, learn about the landscape of VR, communicate and connect with the influencers, and expose yourself to absolutely as much information as possible. I'll be responding to questions on Twitter, and I'm happy to send out information and follow up with this. Thanks for tuning in, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.